Our next speaker is Nina Paley, who is an animator from Urbana, best known for feature films Sita Sings the Blues and Seder Masochism. An outspoken critic of both censorship and sexism, she has been no-platformed and blacklisted locally and abroad for saying penises are male.
Thank you. Well, hey, I'm going to try to do this in 10 minutes, but it's going to be boring because I'm actually just going to be reading things aloud, and I know that's more dull, but I'll talk and interact as soon as that's done. So first, I want to read a quote from Daphne Whitmore of New Zealand from the 12th of March. I slightly edited it. There's a Human Rights Act happening in New Zealand. I just changed that to law. There is a need to separate sex from gender identity. If there is inclusion of gender identity in law, that should only be if it is clearly defined as a distinct characteristic from sex. Sex-based exceptions need to be clear as they exist to protect the rights of natal women. Transgender people's identities should not be given status over women's rights to sex-based exception. Gender identity ideology is a belief system I do not subscribe to. However, I accept the right of others to believe in it, much like religion. Thus, I support the inclusion of gender identity only on the basis that it be clearly distinguished from biological natal sex. I share that opinion. All right, and now I'm going to read you the ever-entertaining open letter to the University of Illinois, an abridged version. It's about half as long as the one on my blog. In July of 2018, Arcadia, a cafe in Urbana, announced on Facebook an art salon at which my new film would be screened. The next day, Professor Mimi T. Gwynn commented on Arcadia's event page, quote, "She's a transphobe. I will never attend your events now." My crime was, months earlier, sharing on Facebook the following lyric: "If a person has a penis, he's a man." At various times, I have also shared such contentious views as women don't have penises, everyone is free to identify however they wish, but not to force me to identify them the same way, and woman means adult human female. Nonetheless, if a person has a penis, he's a man is continually quoted as my greatest hit of so-called hate speech. It is also a fact. When asked by other commenters why my stating biological facts was transphobic and grounds for no platforming, Ms. Gwynn replied, quote, "I'm the chair of Gender and Women's Studies. I know what I'm talking about." Wow. Speaking not merely as an individual, but in her capacity as a UIUC faculty member, Ms. Gwynn threatened local business and libeled a community member and encouraged others to join in. Arcadia promptly canceled the event. That October, my film, Seder Masochism, screened to enthusiastic audiences at the Vancouver International Film Festival. In attendance were film scholars Kristen Thompson and David Bordwell, frequent speakers at past Ebert Fests, who loved the film and emailed Ebert Fest director Nate Cohn to recommend it. Cohn replied they already knew about Seder Masochism, and it was at the top of their list. Later that fall, I turned down an invitation to judge a major film festival in Buenos Aires because its dates overlapped with Ebert Fest. Since Seder Masochism was at the top of their list, I didn't want to miss it. In January, I emailed Nate Cohn and Chaz Ebert to ask if, in fact, Seder Masochism would screen. For over a week, they didn't respond. That same week, I was attacked by a Twitter mob accusing me of hate speech, once again for having said, "If a person has a penis, he's a man." Then, all trace of my film was removed from the website of a women's film festival called Els Tournant in Belgium after they were bullied by a Belgian trans activist. Still awaiting a response at the end of January, I emailed Ebert Fest again. They replied, quote, "Sorry, we don't have room for it." Now, I'm not entitled to be at any film festival, and the decisions of Ebert Fest, a special event of the University of Illinois College of Media, are made behind closed doors, preventing any hope of accountability. But going from the top of Ebert Fest's list to "sorry, there's no room" in the midst of libel campaigns is consistent with the blacklisting and no platforming of feminists at universities nationally and internationally. From the banishing of noted feminist speakers like Sheila Jeffries and Julie Bindel, to the suppression of politically incorrect research at Bath Spa University and Brown University, to secret blacklists of female academics uncovered at Goldsmiths University, the speech-suppressing behavior at the University of Illinois is consistent with unsavory developments around the world. Many in this college town are afraid to voice support for me or express any gender-critical thought for fear of being branded transphobic. Academics elsewhere who even question gender identity have been disciplined or denounced in open letters. Those who express fully gender-critical views have lost their jobs. Between that and the imposition of preferred pronouns, which require the speaker to suppress their correct recognition of biological sex in favor of compelled speech, that is, lying, university employees, their spouses, and friends feel compelled to keep quiet. So, instead of the, quote, opportunities for substantive civic engagement promised in the university's principles, the university instead fosters a climate of fear and silence in the wider community. Beyond this harm to our community, I have been harmed personally. I can't calculate the cost this has had on my professional reputation, career, and livelihood. I have certainly suffered psychological harm. Being falsely accused and shut down and intimidated in my hometown with no accountability for the accusers evokes a despair I had previously only read about in books like The Crucible and Histories of Witch Trials. The university needs to protect speech. I acknowledge the university is in a bind. Recent state interpretations of Title IX have, perhaps unwittingly, redefined sex to include gender identity. As long as Title IX fails to uphold its original purpose, protections based on sex, and instead protects incoherent, ill-defined, and fundamentally sexist concepts of gender identity, it is at odds with the First Amendment and with itself. Preferred pronouns are compelled speech, forcing the speaker to contradict their own recognition of another's sex. This compulsion violates the First Amendment. But preferred pronouns also violate Title IX itself, insofar as it still protects sex. Although trans activists vehemently deny this, there is ample evidence that some trans-identified males are autogynephiles, that is, fetishists who are sexually aroused by imagining themselves as women, which, by the way, I have no problem with. Everybody is entitled to their own kink, but being forced to call such men she is forced participation in sexual activity without consent. That is just one way privileging gender identity over sex is institutionalized sexual coercion. Sex and gender identity are fundamentally mutually exclusive. You cannot protect one without delegitimizing the other. The university considers failure to use preferred pronouns harassment against the individual who imposes them. But preferred pronouns themselves are harassment, including sexual harassment, against individuals compelled to use them. My plea to the university is to reaffirm its commitment to free speech and acknowledge the untenable and inconsistent demands added to Title IX by the redefinition of sex. It is tragic that the former integrity of Title IX, which has been instrumental in providing sex-based protections and opportunities for women and girls, is now in opposition to the First Amendment. Free speech is important. Sex-based protections are important. Redefining sex to include gender identity is an assault on both. Thank you. That was under 10 minutes.
You only won.